What's up, guys? Today we are back in the new and improved Pontiac to talk about the repair I'm doing today on the 05, which is this little guy right here. This is the coolant temperature sensor harness. Now, I had a problem. Basically, the symptom, the way it showed up, was the check engine light was on for coolant temperature sensor voltage too high, and the gauge was dead. It was showing nothing at all. And I found, after a little bit of experimenting, that I could wiggle this harness and get it to work. So you can purchase the temp sensor side of this harness from a lot of different places, but I'll try to link one down below. It does not come with a plug on the other side, so I had to do some soldering. But let's get into the repair and I'll show you what I did. So here's the initial problem. The temp gauge is completely dead. When you start the car, it just stays there forever. And the check engine light is on with a code for that sensor. Now, after pulling the appearance cover here, this is a pretty easy harness to get to. It's right up here in front. All I'm doing is unhooking it from that side, pushing it under this other wiring harness. Then to unclip it from the sensor itself in a easier way, I'm actually gonna get a pick, but you could also use a small flathead screwdriver just to get down there and push the tab back while you pull the harness out with your other hand. And that is all you need to do to get that off the car. Then I took it inside to the workbench, and this is where we're going to solder the new piece in. This is the replacement piece. This is the part number here, which is just listed as a coolant temperature sensor pigtail. It is the sensor side of the wiring, but does not have the harness side of the wiring. It does not have that plug. So we'll need to reuse that off the other one. Another thing I'm going to transfer over is this little piece, which is taped to here and just holds and locates the wire. So I'm going to save that. I'm also going to try to save the wiring loom off of this old one because I don't currently have any. So just so I can put that back on the new one. Some of the loom was busted up pretty badly and not savable, so I threw that away, some of the smaller pieces. But I did hang on to the larger pieces to reuse. Here are a couple of the smaller pieces that I was not able to use. Yeah, I'm just matching them up, and the plugs are different colors, but they are the same. For some reason, the gasket part is different. So I just used the old one to get my length for the new one and cut it right at the other plug, and then strip the wires back some on that side. Then I just gave myself a quarter to maybe a half an inch of wire on the back side of this plug to use on the other and just cut it off right there. I had to actually use a razor blade to get some of this tape off because it was so old and so hardened that it would not peel back. Then I'm just going to strip those back about the same length as I did on the other side. And then I like to twist them together just so while I'm soldering, all of the wiring stays together and stays tight. This is my little tool to help hold the wiring in place while I'm soldering. I picked this up from Harbor Freight for super cheap, but man, does it help if you don't have someone to help hold the things, to give yourself an extra couple of hands. Then what I did was go ahead and tin the wires by soldering a little bit of solder onto each of the wires before I go to connect them. That just makes putting them together way easier later on. This way when they're together and you heat them, they'll actually pull together without you having to do much. Then I'm just going to do the same thing with the wires for the new harness. Then I went ahead and grabbed some heat shrink tubing and stuck that on the wires before soldering them together so I can heat shrink them afterwards. I like this a lot better than tape because there's no openings and no chance of it unraveling later and allowing a short to occur. I started off with some that were a little bit too big, so I had to go back and get smaller ones because you don't want them to be much bigger than the wire or they may not shrink down enough to seal off good. And if your heat shrink tubing is pretty thin, it doesn't even hurt sometimes to put a couple layers. And then I generally will tape over that too when I'm making it back into a harness, when I'm actually looming it and taping it together. So now I'm just using this little thing again to hold the wires together while I solder them. You could just twist these together and tape them, but especially with something like a sensor where it's really important that the reading is correct, you're really better off to solder and get a good solid connection that you know is not going to wiggle free or cause any kind of problems. Now when I'm heating it here, the solder will actually melt back together where I tinned those wires, but then I add a little more solder just to make sure the joint is really good and solid. Then I'm just doing the other side the same way. Then it's just a matter of sliding the heat shrink tubing up over the solder joints and then shrinking them, which you can do using a lighter or a flame of some sort, but I'm actually using this heat gun. And I just let one side shrink, flip it over, let the other side shrink. That seals it up nicely. And with the wiring back together, then I'm going to loom it back together. So I'm just taping up the ends, then I'm going to reapply the loom to the center section and tape that up also. I'm just taping around the whole loom afterwards just to hold it together. This loom is really old and it's pretty fragile, so it wouldn't surprise me if it didn't try to break otherwise. So just taking the extra time to try to make sure that it doesn't. Then back at the car, the next thing we have to do is just put the wiring harness back, which is super easy. It's a little difficult aligning the bottom plug because it's hard to get your hands to. I usually reach one hand around each side of the crossover pipe, but then once you've got that in and connected, then you just got to feed the harness under the main harness here back over to where it plugs in. And when I waited until this point to add back the little hold down that sits on the thermostat housing, just because I wanted to make sure that I got it in exactly the right place. This helps keep the wire pulled back away from the exhaust pipe so that it doesn't lay against that heat shielding and actually melt. And then once you snap both sides together, it is all set. The only thing left to do is start the car back up and see if the problem is gone. Now the check engine light may stay on afterwards, so I would highly suggest resetting it before you start it, which is what I did here. And that was that. This in the trash and everything working correctly. I did this repair several days ago and everything has been working really well ever since. I have not had the check engine light come back on and I haven't had any of the problems return. So it's a pretty simple repair. Thought I'd show you guys what I did though there. Drop this video a like if it was helpful. Give me a comment below and let me know what you think. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel so you see future videos, and I will see you guys in those videos. Thank you for watching, and peace.